Hey Skyline. So for summertime, I wanted to do some different stuff for science. So I was thinking it might be kind of fun to do some baking science because there's a ton of chemistry in baking. So today we're going to be making a yellow cake. Got all my ingredients here. Always, first things first when cooking is I'm going to go wash my hands. So I'm going to go do that and I'll be right back. So unfortunately, my lab assistant can't help. She's not allowed into the kitchen because every time she's in here, she tries to eat the butter off the counter. So she's outside the kitchen. But anyway, my hands are all washed and clean. So first things we're going to do is take a look at the recipe. I'm just going to read the recipe out to you. 2 cups of flour, 1.5 cups of sugar, 1/2 cup of shortening, which I'm going to use butter for, 1 cup of milk, 3.5 tablespoons of baking powder. We're going to talk about that and kind of beat it together. So let's get started with mixing the ingredients. All right, so first thing you want to do is the recipe says to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. So I've already got the oven going at 350. So now, a few ingredients. And I'm going to talk about some different things that we can substitute, just in case you don't have specific things. First off, we got the butter. This has been sitting out for a little bit, so it's a little soft, which will make it a lot easier to mix. I'm going to put this in the bowl right now. Calls for 1/2 cup. 1 stick of butter is 1/2 cup. And now I'm going to put the eggs in there and kind of mix those together. So interesting thing about eggs is this is actually something that you can easily substitute. You can use mayonnaise instead of eggs because mayonnaise is mostly eggs. So if you didn't have any but you still really want to bake the cake, I usually follow the rule of putting about the same amount of mayo as the size of the egg. So this egg is about 1/4 cup, so I would add about 1/4 cup for each egg. So 3/4 cup of mayo to substitute these eggs. All right, let's get these in here. All right, so now I've got the butter and the eggs in there, and we can start mixing that together. Got a mixer in here. Now, you can do this 2 ways. If you have a mixer, that's great. You can also just use like a spoon and kind of mix it all up. It's a lot easier when the butter is soft, and this will take some time of just kind of crushing this butter up and mixing around with stuff. But you can do it. But since I have a mixer, I'm actually going to do it in the mixer because it's a lot faster. Okay, so I'm going to let this go for a minute while I'm getting the other ingredients going. You can see the air bubbles forming, and that's a good thing because the more air you introduce into your cake mix, the more light and fluffy the cake will be. So now, while this is going, getting some more air in here, I'm going to start adding the other ingredients. So we're going to start with sugar, and it's 1.5 cups. So I've got my 1 cup right here. Fill this up. And now we're adding our 1/2 cup. And we'll let that mix, and we'll add in the flour next. Now we're going to do the flour. 2 cups of that, according to the recipe. I'm going to dump it in, and then I'm going to turn the blender on so you can hear me. I don't have to yell. Got 2 cups in there, and there are a few different things that we have to do because we are at a high altitude in Denver. So I'm just going to add a little bit of extra flour in there. And now we're done with the flour. We're done with the sugar. Let's see what's next on our list. Next, we've got some milk. So I'm going to start this beating and get the milk out. Okay, so we got the flour all mixed in. Now we're going to put the 1 cup of milk, which is next on our list. And we'll start beating this up. And then we've only got the small ingredients left. We've got salt, vanilla, and baking powder. And we're going to talk about the baking powder. It's mixed up. Yeah. So you can see it looks pretty wet and moist, and it's exactly how we want it to look. Cake. Our next ingredient is baking powder. It's very similar but very different from baking soda. You guys have seen baking soda quite a bit in our science experiments. We use baking soda because baking soda is a base, and when you mix it with an acid like vinegar, it reacts and makes this big thing. Baking powder is very similar to that, but it actually has a little bit of acid already mixed into it, as I think tartaric acid, cream of tartar sauce, cream of tartar. So when we do this and we put it in our cake mix, what's going to happen is it's going to, as soon as it gets moist, it's going to start mixing with the acid that's in there, and it's going to start creating gas, which will cause the cake to rise. Because otherwise, if we don't have this in there, the cake would be very flat, very dense, and wouldn't be nearly as fluffy and tasty. So we're going to put this in here. It calls for 3.5 teaspoons. Now here's another important thing about being in elevation. When you're at a high elevation, you need to cut the leavener in half. Now leaveners are baking soda, baking powder, anything that makes whatever you're cooking rise. So we're going to cut this in half, and we got to do a little math here. So just so you guys know, in the future, when we're doing this, we will be doing some math and doing some light fraction work, which is part of why I chose baking, because it's got a lot of science and a lot of math. The recipe calls for 3.5 teaspoons of baking powder. If we cut that in half, it goes to 1 3/4 tablespoon. And we're going to be going over that actual math in a later video. But for now, we're just going to start adding it. So we got 1 teaspoon. And then we're going to go on to our 1/4 teaspoon and add 3 of these. 1, 2, 3. Now we've got all the baking powder we need. So let's put this away, and all we need to do is add the vanilla extract and the salt. Now with the vanilla extract, this is something that you may or may not have at home. This you can easily actually swap out for like lemon zest or orange zest. So if you don't have the vanilla, you can just take like a lemon or an orange, and a lot of cheese graters will have this kind of weird spiky side, and you just rub the orange or lemon on this, and that will give you a substitute for vanilla extract, because that's going to have some orange oil or lemon oil or whatever it is, and that'll add that flavor that the vanilla extract adds. But it'll be more orangey or lemony. All right, so now we're going to add our salt, which is just 1 teaspoon. One thing that's always really good to watch out for is it's really easy to use the wrong thing, because right now I'm actually using the 1/2 teaspoon, which is not what I'm supposed to use. I'm supposed to use a full teaspoon. So you always got to double check that. And it's really easy to accidentally put in like a tablespoon instead of a teaspoon, which would make this cake really gross, because that would be too salty. So get our salt in there, and now we're going to add our vanilla extract. All right. Now that is all of our ingredients. All we have to do is finish mixing all this together, and then we gotta cook it. So we'll leave this on blend for a few minutes and let it get nice and airy. It's also really important to mix it really well after you put the baking powder in, because that stuff has to be all throughout the entire mixture in order to really work and make the cake rise properly. The recipe calls for a 9x13 pan, which I have here. However, you can pretty much bake it in anything that's oven safe. You could do a pie dish, you just have to do 2 of them probably. But now our mixture is all ready. So we are going to oil and flour the pan so it doesn't stick to the bottom. And I want to give credit where credit is due. My wife is a much better baker than I am, so she's helping me out on this. I just wanted you guys to know that. My wife just put a small amount of vegetable oil in there, or canola oil, either works. Any oil that doesn't have a whole lot of flavor to it. And she's going to wipe that around. That's just going to coat the bottom of the pan so the cake doesn't stick to it when we go to take it out. And next she's going to put just a little bit of flour in, which is going to be one additional thing to help the cake not stick to the pan. Alright, there we go. Now we can go ahead and just dump the cake into the pan. Now we've got the cake mix. It's all nice and runny, which is just how we want it. So we can just start dumping into the pan. I have a spatula here, which I'm going to use to get the cake batter out. But it's really important that you don't get all the cake batter out, which I'll show you why in just a second. There's the cake batter out. Just going to spread it around so it's coating everything. And want to make it nice and level and even. Alright, and now you can see right here, it's got a lot of space in between the cake mix and the top of the pan. So when we pull this out of the oven, it should be almost up to the top, which is just where we want it. We want it to be nice and fluffy. And now, the most fun part about eating the cake is that you get to lick the bowl and the spatula afterwards. So we're going to stick this in the oven and enjoy our cake batter. The recipe says to bake for 40 to 45 minutes. So we're going to start with the lower number. It's always good to go lower. So timer for 40 minutes. And now we just got to wait for the timer to go off, and we'll see how our cake turns out. The alarm just went off, so our cake should be ready right now. Let's take a look. It looks really good. That's very good. You can use a toothpick. I have a chopstick. And it comes out clean, which means the cake is done. Now all we've got to do is turn the oven off, let it cool, and put some frosting on it. Now, if you look at the side, you can see just how much the cake actually rose. It almost doubled in size, probably more than doubled in size. And as I was saying before, now all we have to do is wait for the cake to cool. And this cake is actually a birthday cake for my wife. And her favorite kind of frosting is this rainbow chip frosting. So whenever it's cool, we're going to put this on there, and then it'll be done. Best part. Well guys, I really hope you enjoyed making the cake, and I hope you can do that at home. That is definitely a project to only do with your parents. But I will leave the comments open in the bottom, and if you decide to make it, let me know. That'd be awesome. Thanks guys.